Hello, wider listeners. It is once again that time of the week. Oh, what time of the week is it, you may ask? Well, it is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Now, this is a weekly political talk radio show where we dig underneath the headlines. We find those stories that the commercial mainstream media doesn't want to talk about, or talk about stories from a kind of more radical working class lens. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. So, something very important to bring up right off the bat. This is the last episode of the radio show before the city elections. There are elections going on next week, if you did not know. Now, we have had the pleasure of having two candidates on the show. Eric Cunningham, who is running for City Commission, was on our show a couple weeks ago. And write-in candidate Chris Wamoff was on our show last week. And Mayor Bobby Hopewell, he was actually supposed to be on the show today. He ended up having to cancel. It's really unfortunate. I had a lot of very important questions to ask, but I guess some other time. That being said, there's actually a story I'm going to read from. There's a late coming write-in candidate just throwing their hat in the ring. So we'll talk about that in a sec. I do want to talk a little bit about, well, so the mayor didn't show up today, and that's quite all right. He's mayor. I'm sure he's a very busy man. But there are a couple of issues that we should. Maybe I should talk about a little bit more, especially with the election right around the corner. And, some of the things, I really wanted to hit on was, the future of the city. I was talking with Chris about this last week, and Kalamazoo's been fairly well shielded from some of the most egregious climate impacts we've seen in the last couple of months. We're not in California experiencing severe droughts and wildfires. We have been hit with several hurricanes in a row. But if y'all remember that rain event, and let's call the rain event, and even just last week, where it wasn't nearly as intense, but it was prolonged rain, went on for a while. That is a localized climate change impact. I talked a little bit. There was a state expert from the Michigan state government who came to visit Kalamazoo about a month and a half ago. And one of the things that they said was that we would have more intense and prolonged rain events. And that's exactly what you saw several weeks ago, where we had Waldo Stadium basically get sunk in the water for a little bit. I live in the Vine neighborhood, and down at Forest and not Westnedge, but Rose. Or Park Street. I'm sorry. Yeah, down at Forest and Park Street, it was completely underwater. I've never seen the Vine neighborhood or Axtell Creek flood over to that degree. It was like that for about 2 days. And I was going to ask the mayor, what is the city's, how's the city going to tackle that in the future? Because this is going to become more common. And any of y'all who live in an area that was flooded, or, I can't tell you how many people I know during that rain event said, my basement never floods. And it did. And that includes myself. We've never, ever had water get into our basement. Well, it did that weekend. So the city's really going to need a hard and fast plan to deal with this flooding when it occurs, because, like I said, this is only going to get more common, even if some magic genie showed up and I don't know, replaced Donald Trump's brain with Bill McKibben's or something. Even if that happened, if we just all started doing what we need to be doing about the climate tomorrow, there's still impacts baked in. So that's going to be a problem for the future of the city. It's something we need to pay attention to. Another thing I wanted to bring up, and so let's lay out the candidates real quick. You have for City Commission, Eric Cunningham, who was on the show a couple weeks ago, Aaron Knott, Jack Urban, Charlie Koss, and Leona Carter. Again, I reached out to all those folks. Sorry, Jack. I did get a hold of Jack last Wednesday, but I did not follow up. Those are going to be the choices for City Commission. Give you a brief rundown, and this is just like my opinion as a Hoodrat strategist. Both Aaron and Jack, I do like what they've had to say about the foundation. They put a couple of the safeguards in it. Again, I don't like how they initially voted on it from the get. And, Foundation for Excellence is a very deep topic, which I will touch on in just a moment. Essentially, they voted for more transparency. Not voted, but Jack Urban advocated for more transparency. Basically, anything that one could obtain through a Freedom of Information Act should just be put online for the public to access. Aaron Knott advocated for the board of this foundation, which, just in brief, that is the $70 million recurring grant. Not necessarily recurring $70 million, but the idea is that a substantial chunk of our budget is going to be subsidized by large money donors. Started off with Bill Johnson and Bill Parfett to $70 million. And in the coming years, we are supposed to basically subsidize our budget through philanthropy. Now, there's some issues that go along with that. We're looking at, in the long run, we could be looking in the next 3 years at like a $650, possibly $675 million price tag to this thing. And anytime you have that kind of money at play, there's a substantial risk of a more powerful moneyed influence exercising disproportionate control. Now, I will get more into depth on that later, but that's basically where you're at. And I think I said the good, some of the bad, I think Aaron Knott has been a little just disingenuous about the emergence of this foundation. A lot of them say, because basically there was this choice between doing this kind of philanthropic option where we would have a handful of wealthy people funding the city, and doing a kind of progressive income tax, which would, to quote New Deal Grandpa, have the 1% pay their fair share of taxes. And basically, the way that they tell it is like, we would have never been able to pass a progressive income tax. There's more to that story. It's not that it was absolutely impossible to do it. It's that essentially a lot of the heavy hitters in the city threatened, we don't want to have to pay this progressive income tax. And not only were they going to fund a very strong anti-tax campaign against it, but there was like some kind of backroom understanding. Like they didn't want to pay their fair share of taxes. They were thinking about leaving the city. To get out of it, of course, that would make them look very bad. So instead, let's just give the city a bunch of money and then give ourselves a property tax cut. So if you've heard anything about the foundation, it's probably that. Like, we got this huge property tax cut. Everybody likes it. Yay, everybody loves Foundation for Excellence. because it's cutting my property taxes. You know, average person who owns a home, we're saving maybe like $200-300 a year. The wealthiest people in the city who own the most property are saving billions. Oh, and how much are you saving if you don't own a home? Yeah, about that much. Yeah, zero. Well, you ain't getting nothing. You ain't getting nothing. There was even an article that, like, the city attorney was like, well, there's not really a way for these savings. We can assure that these savings will pass down to renters. Yeah, so the only candidate who's really been outspoken against the foundation, Leona Carter, at several kind of town hall events, the rest of the candidates, has asked some hard questions about the foundation. You know, who is funding this, who is involved, etc. I'll say Chris Wamoff is probably the most outspoken against the foundation from the get-go. Not only who is funding it, but also possible connections, how this could lead to some other privatization problems in the city. Again, I've interviewed Chris Wamoff on my show about this. We talked about it last week, so you can find that show on YouTube if you want to go more depth into that and find out more about the candidate. Charlie Koss, he is the only more conservative folks running. Strongest part of his platform is getting the lead out of the pipes here in the city. Also, he does work on the Imagine Kalamazoo project, and generally, I mean, those are like the bullet points. So, you know, that's kind of who your choices are coming up. You know, Eric Cunningham, I mentioned him briefly. We also interviewed him on the show a couple weeks ago. Again, if you want to learn more about him, that episode is on YouTube. And he is, one of the only people running, I'd say his big pluses, that is, he's the only person running who was born and raised in Kalamazoo. He really does seem to understand the mechanics of what it's like or the logistics, I would say, of what it's like to live in poverty here in Kalamazoo, and particularly for, the foundation and for the city management. We've really got to make sure there's a big emphasis on using these new resources to help the poorest parts of the city that need it. It'd be very easy for this to become a gentrification tool, particularly if this is going to be at the behest of the donor class. And let's be absolutely clear, towards the later end, when they were really deciding the nuts and bolts of the articles of incorporation with this Excellence Foundation, they axed a ban on restricted gifts. That means a donor can say, I'm giving money and I demand that it be used specifically for X, Y, or Z. Danger of that is, the money may not get prioritized in the way it needs to be. Maybe somebody will give a bunch of money to fix up the park downtown, while no resources are going to the north side or the south side or the east side. The neighborhoods that really need it. And what they've been telling us about this foundation, it's going to tackle, we're going to eliminate generational poverty. And, there's this clip from, it's the commission meeting where they approved the foundation, and there was a concern among Shannon Scheich. Her seat is not up this election, but she mentioned how, she's afraid, we're starting to backpedal. We can't eliminate all generational poverty. You gotta have an aspirational goal. That's what I say. Aspirational projects. That's what they call the extra projects that they want to do with this money. Besides just kind of pulling our budget out of insolvency. And, to be clear, before this Excellence Foundation was proposed, Kalamazoo was broke. we was struggling. So. Yeah, I would say, there for people to be up on that commission, it is important to have a lifelong resident who understands what it's like to live in one of the poorer neighborhoods in Kalamazoo. Again, I probably would have liked all the candidates to be a little bit more skeptical about the foundation, but that's just me. So, if you want to learn more, again, Eric Cunningham and Chris Wamoff are the ones we did in-depth interviews with. And you can also look up the others online. That's Aaron Knott, Jack Urban, Leona Carter, and Charlie Koss. And then, of course, Chris Wamoff for mayor and the current incumbent mayor, Mayor Hopewell. But hey, that's not all. There's actually a new candidate just jumped on the docket. I believe it was yesterday, actually. So let's go ahead and go right to the article. I don't actually know too much about this fellow myself, so I'll be kind of learning along with you guys. I did think there was something a little interesting that I'll comment on that he said about one of the folks that he's running against. So this is a headline. Michael Hussar, or Husser, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce that. Sorry, Michael. Files as late write-in candidate for Kalamazoo mayor. Michael Hussar, a Kalamazoo realtor, will run for mayor as a write-in candidate. Hussar, 38, filed on October 10th, 4 weeks before the election. Kalamazoo native and Western Michigan University graduate said he is running to give voters a choice between Hopewell and Wamoff. Hussar said he filed his application materials far past the July 25th deadline because he was too busy with work obligations to gather the appropriate signatures. It doesn't seem like there is much of an option. It's either Bobby or Chris. I would like to have a third option, Hussar said. One is a reasonable candidate, one is crazy. I'm kind of in the middle of that. So which one is reasonable? Which one is crazy? Hussar said he sees the community as taking the generosity of philanthropists for granted and wants to make public policies that create tangible, positive outcomes. He said transparency has to be paramount in regard to the Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence, and the money has to be optimized to benefit the public. And, hey, I would definitely agree with that. I don't think of myself as a liberal or conservative. I'm in the middle because both parties have good and bad ideas, Hussar said. One thing I'm adamant about is we need this area to stand on its own economically. We're in a unique spot where we have a high density of billionaires, good fortune that other communities don't have. Hussar said he doesn't consider himself a better or a worse candidate than Hopewell, and Hussar has voted for the longtime mayor himself in the past. But he feels that competition is necessary for residents to pick their representative. Hussar graduated from WMU with a bachelor's degree in general management. He is an agent with Berkshire Hathaway Real Estate. So, interesting last minute kind of candidate hop in the ring there. So that's, again, I don't know too much about him myself, but that's who it is. That's what it is. I do like what he has to say about the foundation. So, speaking of which, there is another, not quite election, but very important public service board that is seeking out nominees, and it hasn't really been publicized very well, which is actually a big critique of mine. But I'm speaking, of course, about the Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence is going to be choosing their board over the course of November. The final yes or no decision will be made on the December 18th at a Kalamazoo City Commission meeting. But this board, here's my concern right now. This was done without all that much time. It was little over half a month when the city website published the notice saying we are seeking nominees for the inaugural board of the Foundation for Excellence. And the deadline is today by midnight. So look, first of all, let me pitch it to you, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. I applied for the board. Why is this board important, you may ask? Oh my goodness, let me tell you why. This board is going to basically figure out the skeleton and the initial policies and direction of the Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence. It's arguably more important than just about every board that's going to follow it, because it is going to be setting down the ground rules and kind of the mission points and the priorities of what this foundation is going to become. So, what I've been doing lately as a local activist and organizer, I've really been encouraging well-educated, just like the show, with well-educated Hoodrats to go apply for that board. And it's broken up into different stakeholder positions. Now, what does that mean? That means basically different categories. Different categories of representation. So, for example, there's. Hold on, let me pull up the post. I don't want to misquote myself. So, the positions that are on the board are for housing, healthcare, faith-based organizations, education, arts community, and affinity organizations. That means like nonprofits or like an activist group if you work with one. Also business, and they say /banking, which by the way was a huge red flag to me. I don't want any bankers on that board. I think y'all know why. We talk about bankers a lot on the show. So I've encouraged a lot of small business owners to apply for that. Now here's the deal. Now there's a real sense, and maybe this is a cynic in me that says they've probably already got this board pretty much figured out. I put some, with my group Kalamazoo for Revolution, we put some pressure on the city to look for like a neutral party to pick out this board, because it's like, okay, they're not going to be directly chosen by the city commission, which frankly would have been optimal. That's what you're really supposed to do. The commission basically has yes or no power, but like it's anyway. So they gave the decision-making power over who this board will be to the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. Now, I want to give a big caveat to this. I do not dislike the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. I think they do a lot of really good work in the community. But at the same time, Kalamazoo Community Foundation is basically already the arbiter of the donor class in the city. And what it needs to be is to create like some actual distance and separation. So the people who are in charge of picking out this board are not doing it at the behest of people who traditionally, like, that's what the Kalamazoo Community Foundation's function is. They facilitate the donor money of like the billionaire philanthropists of this town, and it's hard for me to think that they're not going to have a little bit of influence on who the Kalamazoo Community Foundation chooses, particularly because, and look, I have not had time to contact them yet, but I've got some very important questions. Like, are there going to be public sessions to find out how they're choosing this board? Is it going to be transparent? Are we going to be able to go and see these discussions about like who they end up choosing on this board? Or is it all going to be behind closed doors and we're just going to see it sometime in the month of November? Well, those are important questions to ask, and I will be asking them to the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, that's for sure. And I encourage anybody, y'all, if you feel like you can do it, we need some decent people controlling and guiding where this money is going to go. Look, glass half full, like, this could be a really good tool for the city, but frankly, knowing how this foundation started and the reasons for it, to basically a couple billionaires wanted to get out of paying taxes. And I know that sounds pretty cynical, but I mean, really, like, look at these guys. Johnson, Wall Street guy, was the one who decided, when they were talking about this foundation at the beginning, did it very much behind closed doors, just kind of spilled it out to the commission without talking to the city commission first. There's a great Medium article, Why Some Are Looking a $70 Million Gift Horse in the Mouth, and it really dives deep into some of the dubious beginnings of this foundation. And then we got Bill Parfett, who, again, in the long run, he's probably not going to be as influential as Johnson, but like, he's got some bad ties, man. Like, former chair of Monsanto, formerly on the board of MPI Research, former chair of Rick Snyder's Political Action Committee, and he's also have really terrible rape allegations against him. And hey, that's another thing I would have asked Mayor Hopewell on the show. Especially in the last few weeks, we've had Weinstein and Kevin Spacey, and all this stuff come out that is really putting rape culture under the microscope. And yet, one of the people I'll just say is buying our city, more or less, is a sexual predator. That's so. Going back to the point. Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence. You can go to their city website, and I will pull up the link right now. It's city invites applicants for Foundation for Excellence Board of Directors. It's kalamazooCity.org/news/311 city-invites-applicants -4-foundation-for-excellence-board-of-directors. So that's the link. Y'all got till midnight. We at least, please, I'd say it's only about 10 minutes of your time. And if we get a lot of people with those values applying, they may not get on the board, but it'll send a very clear message, a very clear mandate of how people want this money spent. So we're going to take a quick little break. You're listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
WIDR would like to thank Kalamazoo Shoegazer 11 for supporting Radio Evolution. The 11th annual Kalamazoo Shoegazer will be taking place November 4th at Bell's Eccentric Cafe, located on 355 East Kalamazoo Avenue. This event is 21 and over. For more information, you can call 269-382-2332 or go to bellsbeer.com/events. Thanks for the support.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, I believe my co-host will be joining us in just a second. So, oh, actually, they're here right now. So, I will be right back. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Joined by my good friend here, Lawrence, who is also quite adept at spitting those truth bombs hither and thither. So, I just got here. I was just talking about the local elections we got coming up and the Excellence Foundation and.
I need to start doing some more research on that. I am not as adept on those things.
That is a very deep rabbit hole, my friend.
Oh man, I've heard from multiple sources how deep that rabbit hole goes. From the a former chair of Monsanto trying to buy. Basically trying to buy Kalamazoo.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there is no try. He did.
He basically bought
done.
Kalamazoo. I need to. What? And isn't there a thing? Isn't there a thing going on till midnight tonight?
Yeah,
or something?
apply for the board. The board for the foundation. So. If you,
I might apply for the board.
You should. I think we should just. I've been telling people just flood them with applications. They might already have kind of handpicked who they're gonna put on there, but more legit, like working class intellectuals, we can flood them with. Like they'll at least get an idea of like what we want them to be doing.
Another thing that we need to do is demand, not ask, demand transparency from the Excellence Foundation. We need to demand transparency of where the money is going, how the money is being spent, and who is the money going to. We need to demand that transparency.
Yeah.
I know that that's a lot of money, and a lot of people get really nonchalant because they're like, oh man, it's a gift, so why should we complain about a gift? It's like, no, we need to know where the money that's supposed to be helping Kalamazoo, not only where it's coming from, but where is it going. Because if it's supposed to be helping people from Kalamazoo, it needs to be going to causes that help the people of Kalamazoo, not the billionaires that live in Kalamazoo and helping their pockets. Yep. We have to demand that. And we also need, and I'm also part of this as well, people need to be informed. People need to be informed about it.
Yeah, and it's definitely not the easiest topic to digest. It's not like some Trump tweet where you're like, oh, guys, it's like exactly what to be outraged about. But
it's not like one of Trump's staffers basically talking about how Robert E. Lee is a brilliant man a few days ago. Did you see that? You see that whitewashing of history?
I heard about that.
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
We can talk about that. Oh, we can talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. But that, it's not at. See, that's the thing. We have blatant, outrageous garbage like that, and then you have subtle things like the Excellence Foundation, where they will strip away your democracy and your choice, and they will do it with a smile on your face.
And I'd say one of the more concrete worries, like I mentioned this, like this money being used as like a tool for gentrification, and I'm already starting to see I talked to my activist friends on the north side and Vine neighborhood, Edison, and there have been like kind of these red flags where I've talked to some north side activists who are like they're pushing downtown further into the north side. There's some rezoning going on in the Vine neighborhood where there's actually this family, this Hispanic family that lives in like a couple houses around there, and they're getting zoned out. The city is trying to zone them out of the Vine neighborhood. Yeah. And all it's important to make those connections, because if we don't pay attention, who knows, we'll get some, the park will get refurbished, but there's not going to be any investment where
it's needed. And I mean, I lived on the north side all my life, and after you pass North Street, it's darn near night and day, and all of that area is still working class poor. So you have North Street closer towards downtown, and you have North Street pushing back towards the highway. And there are certain places, maybe I've just dealt with this, but there's certain places like restaurants that won't even deliver to that section of the north side. There's places that mostly because it has, I'm not gonna be PC when I say this, it has more minorities there. There's more middle class, poor working class people who live on that side. A majority of them are brown and black people, and there's places there. It's interesting to me, a couple months ago, we were talking about the water systems and how they were changing the water systems, like on the west side and things like that. I didn't hear much about the pipes and water systems being changed on the south side and on the north side. And that's something that, they were changing it on the west side, and I'm like, y'all not gonna. There's no inspections gonna be done on the north side. There's a lot of old houses that are on the north side or on the south side that are over 30, 40, 50 years old. And the pipes that feed into those houses are probably just as old. And I was, that's just my observation. I don't have enough data to actually speak on that with more clarity. I will do that next week. That will be my job next week. I do want to talk about the topic that we were about to bring up.
Oh my god! So this got lost in the shuffle a little bit. But if y'all didn't know, so the JFK documents dropped a few days ago, and
already planned to drop.
Yeah,
President Obama already planned on releasing these files during his administration, but our current POTUS does what he does best.
He took credit. Yes.
Oh, yeah. He took someone else. Someone else did the work, and he put his name on it and said it was his.
Probably was like, see, I'm draining the swamp. I'm getting the files out. I was like, I didn't have anything to do.
It was already scheduled to happen. Like, no, stop it.
And so there's a something like 3,000 pages that were not released, which given the nature of the story we're about to tell, like, it's like, man, I wonder, like, what was so bad that they couldn't release it? Because I'm like, it's worse than this. Oh man. Yeah. And what we're talking about, here's the headline: CIA considered bombing Miami and killing refugees to blame Castro. Oh man.
Keep reading.
Okay, so
you gotta keep reading.
All right, this article is from the Miami New Times. Okay, so only a fraction of the JFK documents released last night. Still, the 2,800 papers, including the new document dump, confirm some salacious details of America's decades-long quest to kill or depose Fidel Castro, including a fairly shocking plan by the CIA to sow terror in Miami. So, by the way, whoever's calling in, we should be on break around 6 o'clock, so maybe briefly talk to you then. So, anyway. After Castro's revolution succeeded and thousands of Cubans fled to South Florida, the agency actually considered murdering a boatload of refugees, assassinating exile leaders, and planting bombs in Miami. All so that Castro could be blamed for the chaos. The basic idea was to turn world opinion against Castro and possibly justify a U.S. military invasion by pinning the atrocities on him. The details of the sinister plot are included in a summary about Operation Mongoose, a 1960 covert op hatched by the CIA under President Dwight Eisenhower with the aim of toppling communist Cuba. Campaign was included in a report on pretext the U.S. could conjure up to justify a military intervention in Cuba. And I'm going to read, this is right from the document, straight from, straight from the horse's mouth, the horse being the CIA. We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington. The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated, in parentheses. We could foster attempts on lives of Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding in instances to be widely publicized, exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of a Cuban agent, and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the idea of an irresponsible government. So Lawrence, you know how, like, conservatives are always talking about how, like, we need to reduce government and, have smaller government. Can we start with the CIA? Please.
I mean, all of you Latinos and Puerto Ricans and people in Florida who's been voting for Republicans since they were young, and when they first got here. The Republicans that you were voting for wanted to blow you up. They wanted to blow you up so we could do an invasion into Cuba.
I mean,
this is around the same time that the Bay of Pigs, and for people who remember that the Bay of Pigs was a failure, it was a complete and utter failure, and this was also a part of the military-industrial complex that America had to keep control of the empire, to slow and or stop the influence of communism around the world. And America was so afraid of communism that we were going to invade Cuba, one of our neighbors. And we had an embargo on them for over 50-something years. We had an embargo on Cuba longer than me and Andy have been alive. Combined. That's how afraid we were of this tiny island. And again, I understand during historical context, but you can't claim to be the morally superior party when you are planning terrorist attacks against innocent civilians just so you can invade a country.
Yeah, that's right. We talk about a lot on the show that, when we talk about terrorism or Islamic terrorism, their greatest tool, propaganda weapon, is all the stuff that the United States has actually done and continues to do. It's you will have no better recruitment material than hey, my family just got blown up by a drone missile. And it's oh, well, we've got this thing called ISIS. It's got full benefits, vacation days. We'll feed you.
Here's the thing, and this is a conversation that I had the other day. It's it piggybacks off that statement. You have people who are in poor, disenfranchised areas. They're in poor, disenfranchised areas, and there's no economic situation for them, so they can be stable and they can be safe to provide for their family. So what do? They look for the quickest and safest thing that will protect their family and bring them revenue. Okay, so what can you do? You could be a smuggler. You could join a radical group that said that they will protect you and your family. And if your family has been attacked by the people who said they came to liberate you, that's adding more fuel to the fire. On top of that, this also goes back to, what does America stand for? This goes back to that main question. I'm glad that we did not do this. I'm glad that it's something that we didn't do, because I don't imagine the Statue of Liberty saying, bring us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to break free, so we can bomb them and use their deaths as a tool to go to war. That is not what America stands for. That is not who we are as a society. That's not what we're supposed to be representing, and that's what makes these findings so mind-blowing. Because as much as things have changed, the more who stay the same. A few days ago, and this is relevant to today, because a few days ago, it was one of Trump's one of his speakers or somebody, one of the officials in the White House, basically said that they do not need to go through Congress if they wanted to attack North Korea. They basically were saying that they could attack. They can put. Tillerson was talking about that they can put the war, if they wanted to attack North Korea, they could add that to the war against terror that George Bush and President Obama was using to ride into these conflicts.
Oh, by the way, if I could just, I want to interject a little bit real quick with some context to that, because this is actually part of like a smidge of good news. So after what happened in Niger, where there are a lot of people in Congress who had no idea that we were conducting military operations there, they actually said, we're going to have a hearing on the War Powers Act. And, that's something we were complaining on the show about, how, like, everybody decided to, most of Congress, except for, like, Rand Paul, Bernie Sanders, and, like, I think, like, one or two other people, said, like, no, let's not renew the War Powers Act. And, like, this was the thing that was passed after 9/11. Okay. Yeah. So, that was the thing that was passed after 9/11 that granted George Bush and his administration the purview and ability to conduct these military operations without direct congressional approval. Because it used to be Congress would have to make a formal declaration of war in order to actually, send our forces that way. So, for the first time since 9/11, there's actually going to be a discussion in Congress about this. And, I mean, that's kind of a good thing. It's also facilitated by the rhetoric that Trump has been using with North Korea. But, yeah, again... yeah, you have people like Tillerson just arguing that, like, oh, he should retain these powers, and like we've seen what these government agencies do when there's not some sort of legislative elected body to keep them in check.
But to also to add to that, it's that's a fantastic point. But also, we have to put this into context of today. They were going to do that to go to war in Cuba. Our second dumbest president of all time put us into 2 wars off the books with a blank check. Our nice speaking, wonderful smiling president that was very charismatic took those 2 wars and said throw some D's on it, and we went to 7 interventions, and multiple interventions of us being in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan. I swear I'm missing a few others. Not Saudi Arabia.
Somalia?
Yeah, no, I know I'm missing a few.
Yeah.
But then, and the countless oversight committees, or whatever they like to say, special forces committees that we're doing in African countries and other places. Now you have Iran, which they want to go to war with. And you have North Korea, which our country and our president is dying to go to war with. The first question that I would like to ask anybody, and this is after reading these files, and especially the news media, justify why are we in the current wars that we're in right now? Why are we still there? Second thing is, if the CIA has been doing this, and we found out about Abu Ghraib and the legal torture sites that George Bush did under his reign, and we found out about the different missions under President Obama's reign, why hasn't anyone, or isn't there been any other visible oversight that the community could see? That Americans could see.
I mean, that's the whole thing. When you're dealing with agencies like the CIA, they can wrap themselves in like national security,
yeah.
And they use that as a way to conceal like the more nefarious stuff that they're up to. Like, we don't usually find out about these things until long
40
after. 40 years later. And you mentioned like this Miami false flag didn't actually go through, but let's think of the things at the time that did. The reason for our involvement in Vietnam started with a false flag. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, where they said that there's the Vietnamese attacked an American ship, which turned out was completely fabricated. That never actually happened, but they needed something to motivate the American public to basically being okay and getting involved in this military intervention.
I forgot the journalist that said they manufactured consent. I forgot the journalist who said it.
I can't remember that.
Yeah, but we do it today. We are still doing it today. They did it for the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, about going into war with countries that did not attack us. If we were going to go after the people that attacked us on 9/11, we would have went to war with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
But again, like I said before on the show, if Saudi Arabia was giving us cabbages instead of oil, then it would be a completely different discussion. But we have a special. We have to take a break. We have to take a quick break.
And we're joined. Jack Urban, City Commissioner, is here on the program. We're gonna sit down and chat with him. And do another one of our in-depth interviews. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Terminator would never stop. It would never leave him. And it would never hurt him, never shout at him or get drunk and hit him or say it was too busy to spend time with him.
Hey, this is Andrew Bird, and you're listening to WIDR 89.1.
This is Scott from Dr. Dog, and you're listening to 89.1 Wider.
And the rain coming down.
Wider is proud to be supported by Pedal Bicycle. Pedal Bicycle has 2 locations on 611 West Michigan Ave and 185 Romans Road. More information can be found at pedalbicycle.com.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. We are joined today with City Commission candidate and current City Commissioner Jack Urban. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show, Jack. So let's go ahead and start. So my co-host had a question just as he was leaving, and this is something that's really been in the news a lot lately. Particularly, we've got problems at the state level. We're talking about marijuana, and particularly, there's the culture around it. It's starting to be a little bit more tolerant of medical marijuana and dispensaries. However, and this is something we've talked about on the show, like the startup costs for a marijuana business for medical marijuana are fairly astronomical. It's between like $250,000 to $500,000. So, as this issue evolves, how do you see Kalamazoo as being able to take advantage of it from a business perspective, but also tell us, how you feel personally about how, marijuana should be a presence in the city? Do you think it's something that should we look at models like Colorado, Ann Arbor, or is it something you think should be strictly kept for medical necessity?
Hi, I'm Jack Urban, City Commissioner, one of 6, not counting the mayor. How I feel about marijuana? Well, it's a hallucinogen, first of all, and so it has to be viewed from the standpoint of how does it stand up relative to alcohol and other things like that. So I can't imagine having marijuana be regulated any less than alcohol is being regulated. And I certainly can appreciate that there's a need for medical marijuana. I have a fellow who used to work for me is a grower in Portage. He's worked very carefully with the sheriff for a number of years, and he has a small coterie of people he supplies for. And knowing him, I know he did it all by the book, and he's been successful. So it can be done, and I think with some care and some discernment, I think we can do that here. First of all, for medical marijuana, and we'll see how tightly how reasonable the regulations are, and how. 2 things. How easy is it for the people who need it to get it, and how hard is it for the people who don't need it to get it? I've had pretty much of an open mind about this. Clearly, people are kind of excited about the revenue. 1, tax revenue for jurisdictions, and 2, income for entrepreneurs. But there's a community involved that has a stake in this, too, that's neither a jurisdictional entity nor an entrepreneur, and there's trouble too. So I have an open mind about it. I'm looking for guidance from people who I trust, who have some experience in law enforcement, and some people who have some eagerness to provide opportunities for people who want to get in a new line of business. It seems like it's the most exciting thing since driverless cars. So I don't think we should get overly excited about income potential from it, because if the income is that great, then probably some people who shouldn't be using it are using it.
Well, that's true, and I think I'm very pro legalization, but my biggest concern with marijuana is it's not nearly as destructive of a drug as a lot of people let on, but I don't want it getting in the hands of the youth, because what marijuana essentially makes you feel okay with doing nothing if you're using it recreationally. I mean, that's not across the board. A lot. I know some artist friends who it kind of helps cultivate their creativity, but it reminds me of a kind of a recent instance. I was doing some. I was part of a march on the north side, and there were some concerns about like basically kind of neighborhood blight and how these businesses could almost be more like a liquor store. So there's definitely like a need to be very intentional about how and what these places. But I guess I would say if we get to a point where we're trying to grow medical marijuana businesses, or if somewhere down the line we see actual like legalization, will there be more of an emphasis on helping local community members basically kind of develop a pipeline towards turning themselves into like legal businessmen? Because I've also seen there's like a lot of foreign investment who are trying to come in and start these medical dispensaries when frankly there's a lot of local talent in Kalamazoo that should be prioritized.
Well, I noticed that there was some move to increase the amount of capital required to get a license, which is really kind of, I have mixed feelings about that. You don't want irresponsible and undercapitalized people doing this because they're going to be cutting corners and be nearly bankrupt before they even get started, and that gets everything off on the wrong foot. Because on the other hand, the kind of amount that they were talking about defeats the very purpose of creating new entrepreneurship. I mean, who has $500,000 to put on the table right at the very beginning? It'd be great if the $500,000 could be applied to training in operating, developing a business plan, and doing some mentoring of these folks. There's lots of people who try to open coffee shops who could have benefited with some small business assistance, advice even. So I'm open-minded, but I have to say I'm careful about it. What other topics do you have to?
Well,
to
that actually leads in to another important question. So, I was talking a little bit about the foundation earlier in the show, and one of my concerns has been are the resources going to be going where they really need to go, and in the context of business. I think it's very important that it's very intentional about empowering local entrepreneurs, local startup business, rather than trying to draw like outside companies into investment. I'm really about like kind of neighborhood self-sufficiency and basically giving resources to the talent we have here in the community. And I was just curious, like, do you share that priority, and how best do you think we can use those resources to help local entrepreneurs and businesses start up?
Well, I came from a meeting this morning where we were touching on a related topic, which is how to provide more fulfilling and more higher paying employment for people who live in the city. Not necessarily people who are out of work, but people who are basically underemployed in 2 or 3 part-time jobs, not having enough time for their family, and not having enough free time to actually get trained for a higher level job. One of the possible tools to use is to actually encourage entrepreneurship, because now you don't have, if you have a felony on your record, you can go into business for yourself as long as you have some money. Mm-hmm. You don't have to worry about a lot of checks with employers. For example, I know of someone who did federal time for a drug offense, and when he got out, he went into a rental property business, on a small scale at first. He had enough money to buy a property that he could rent out, and he had the time on hand to keep the property up. And because of his experience, I think he probably had the firmness to deal with tenants who were difficult. Mm-hmm. But he was right from the get-go. He was in charge of his own life. So that's just point. In general, getting back to your main topic, I think it's recognized among the city leaders that we can't depend on Southwest Michigan First, for example, to help the city of Kalamazoo out. That's a regional entity that is responsible for many, many counties, and they're looking for the big guns, the top 400, the Fortune 500 companies, pretty much.
Yeah.
And Kalamazoo decided several years ago to cut the cord with Southwest Michigan First and develop an economic program in-house. And we have 2 people now working in that area that are really good. Jerome, of course, has been around for a while, Jerome Criscorni. And he has 2 helpers that I know pretty well, Dwayne Powell and Ryan Simpson. Ryan works with kind of established businesses, and Dwayne is working on getting people started. And they work very well together, as near as I can tell, and they're both enthusiastic. So in terms of the people with the right ideas, the city has them. Now, money and programs, well, because of the effort that we have with Shared Prosperity Kalamazoo, which is one of the 5 priorities of the city, developing entrepreneurships and small businesses in the city fits into that priority. So that means it's eligible for funding with tax dollars and from the Foundation for Excellence. Now, of course, programs in that area, as with all programs that have to do with things that aren't basically nuts and bolts, like, paying for the police, the streets, the sidewalks, and so forth, have to be prioritized. And so, because Kalamazoo is a kind of a mini Ann Arbor in terms of a bastion of progressive thought. It may not seem that way to you, but relative to some other cities, I think we're pretty progressive. I can fully expect that there will be some effort to improve the job situation in Kalamazoo, and entrepreneurship and small business development is certainly one of them. So that's a long answer. I hope that's sufficient.
No, that's thank you very much. And it's like I would say Kalamazoo is a fairly progressive city, but somebody's got to be like the radical fire prod or cattle prod, I guess. Yeah. So actually, here's a question, and it's you spoke before. So you're an engineer, correct? And what? Just real quick, what sort of engineering is that? Because it leads into the follow-up question that I was about to ask.
Well, I was trained as a chemical engineer. I have a degree from Lehigh University in Bethlehem, which is just up the street from Bethlehem Steel. And then I have a PhD from the University of Maryland. And right after I finished there, I came to work for Upjohn.
Okay.
And I left Upjohn 30 years later, before it became Pfizer. And so chemical engineering is, in my case, manufacturing antibiotics and genetically modified, purifying genetically modified, the products of genetically modified organisms. In other words, in the case, the last thing I was working with was bovine growth hormone, which sounds pretty dreadful, but it's used pretty widely to enhance milk production. And but the drug never got approved. We built a whole plant, made a few test lots. The FDA never approved it. Great technical achievement, zero in terms of profits.
Okay, well, so what I was actually going to kind of lead into with that, and it's not really directly in the wheelhouse of chemical engineering, but I've asked other candidates about this. So, in the last month, Kalamazoo's had two pretty peculiar, sustained rain events. This actually tied into our climate change trajectories. There's this climate expert. He came to speak in town about a month and a half ago, and he mentioned that, Kalamazoo in this particular region is going to be safe from a lot of the more drastic impacts, but we are going to see more intense and sustained rain events. And we had some fairly, intense flooding that happened over those weekends. So given that events like that are going to become more common, what does the city need to do, or what do you think the city needs to do, from a point of infrastructure and preparedness in order to kind of deal with these intense rain events, which are going to become more common?
Well, James Baker, our city engineer, has begun preliminary work to develop flood control methods that would work in the Crosstown Parkway area and Portage Creek, and the backup that occurs when the Kalamazoo River is high. But the funding for that is going to be, millions and millions of dollars, which the city doesn't readily have. However, periodically, FEMA awards grants to flood-prone areas. And we want to, the city of Kalamazoo wants to have their projects shovel-ready to submit when the funding becomes available. That's I've heard James Baker talk about that. That's in the works.
Okay, so I guess if we want to get any flood funding, we'll have to vote for Trump next time. No,
let's not go there.
Yeah.
So far, a lot of the agencies are still functioning the way they have for years because the bureaucrats who are there are dedicated to their work. They really they're there because they believe in what they're doing. After many more years of our current administration, those people will retire or get fed up, and the people that replace them could be vastly different. But as of right now, we have a lot of really well-intentioned people who want to do the right thing still in place.
Oh, yeah, no, and sorry, that was a snarky little bit. FEMA is not a monolith, and, that's kind of reference to their kind of lackluster response to Puerto Rico. But in general, I think what we've essentially really seen since his election is that the president has a certain amount of power, but not necessarily locally and regionally. So, all right, before we go on to that side tangent, let's refocus on local issues. So. Sure. Let's kind of touch on the foundation again. So the board is getting picked over the course of this month. Applications actually due at midnight tonight. It's kind of related to something I was mentioning earlier, but one of the things that I'm really afraid, or I'm kind of nervous about, is that a lot of this money might end up going into gentrification projects, or this money might be directed in such a way that it really doesn't get to the neighborhoods that it needs to. And I've been critical of the pilot kind of program for the foundation was this tax cut, which disproportionately helps people with a lot of property and a lot of resources. So the commissioners will kind of be there to get voice approval, disapproval. What are you going to do sitting on that board to kind of use your platform and your power to guide those resources in such a way that are going to help out those neighborhoods like Edison, like the North Side, like the East Side, and not necessarily just get pumped into making downtown better or being used for things that aren't going to directly help people who are low income or in poverty here in the city?
Well, first of all, I'm not a member of the board of directors. I'm only right now. I'm just a city commissioner. However, in the next 2 months, 2 city commissioners will be chosen to be on the board, and we'll see if one of them is I. So I don't want to speculate too much about imagining that I'm in some place that I'm not. But as a city commissioner, I'll be involved in approving the annual budget, which will have in it aspirational projects that we will be asking the foundation to fund. And the city commission will have some involvement in setting the priority for those funds, those aspirational project funds. And it's very important that what we do is benefits. Everybody can see that they have a stake in the outcome of whatever we do. In some cases it'll be a direct stake. In some cases it'll be an indirect stake. But we really can't pick out just neighborhoods and say, we're going to help this neighborhood, because there's another neighborhood. They'll say, well, what about me? I mean, as I go around the city right now doing canvassing to get reelected, I hear some resentment from neighborhoods that don't have neighborhood associations and directors. They feel that they are neglected. Now, how true that is hard to tell instantly, but they don't have as much of a presence in the city's affairs. And so what comes their way may be just adventitious. Mm-hmm. But we have to be really careful that as city commissioners, since we're elected at large, we're expected to serve everybody, and that's what government should do. But not everybody's going to get served directly. Some people can survive with relatively little help. People like myself, who lived a life of white privilege for a long while, I don't need a lot of help, you know. But I am indirectly helped by what's supplied to others who need more help, and it makes the streets safer. It makes the whole general economy work better. It makes the whole city feel more wholesome. So general prosperity is good for everybody.
Oh, that's true.
And just serving the wealthy just aggravates the problem. I mean, the thought that the city would be a part of that is hard to accept. Now, why the foundation donors agreed to or asked that the property tax be lowered was they believe that there's going to be an indirect benefit to everybody for that, because they believe very strongly that a property tax rate of 19.27 mils was scaring people away and causing people to build things like Costco right outside the city limits, clearly intended for people within the city to use. Everybody on 131 driving by can use it. Everybody in Oshimo can use it. But why did they put it right there? You know, they were tapping our population, but not paying taxes to us. Well, partly it's because of the 19.27 mils. Well, now it's down to 12 mils. We're now in the range of where other jurisdictions are. So that's a general benefit to everybody. I was not happy with the way that came about. The Blue Ribbon Commission, when it was meeting, had on its plate an income tax to be considered. And that when that came up for discussion, some members of that body pretty much engineered a big propaganda attack to scare people away from that. And a lot of us, including some people on that commission, were very annoyed with the tactics that were used and the result of those tactics. So I felt that, okay, if that's how certain members of the community feel about it, taking one of the most likely to be successful ways of raising money that actually get enough money to actually make a difference, taking that off the table and said, well, okay, now that you've done that, what's your idea? Okay, it's on you now. Mm-hmm. Well, fortunately, the people who represent that segment of our community said, okay, well, we have this idea. And it's very, very considerate of them and really forward-thinking of them to actually do that. Because he could have said, well, that's your problem, you know? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, fortunately, we're blessed with some philanthropists who I think are involved in some other things in the city. Clearly are doing this more than just to get a tax deduction. I think we're blessed that way. But you have to realize, with that much of our city income, about a third of it now coming from a non-tax source, there's got to be a sense of trust between the parties. That's why I want to get reelected. That's what I really think is very important that we accomplish in this formation period, and in the way we operate once the directors are in place, and the first few decisions they make are going to be really critical in establishing, will there be trust between the general public and the leaders on this board, or will there be suspicion? So transparency and accessibility of data is really key. Now, the data may have to be digested somewhat so it's understandable. You know, just raw data with, you know, like a bookkeeping entries aren't very helpful. So the data has to be refined a bit so it's understandable, but not so refined that a lot of stuff gets hidden. So where the balance is here is something that I want to work on. As an engineer, I've depended on data. I'm swayed by data, and I'm very reluctant to make a decision without having some data. Mm-hmm. I've seen my colleagues, and maybe I have an occasion just indulged in speculation. But if the speculation doesn't lead to something solid, it's just BS.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's true.
So I'm excited about this, but it is new territory. It's something no other city in the U.S. has that much of its income coming from a non-taxable source. New York has foundations too that operate kind of the way this one does, but they're a much smaller percentage of the total city revenue.
Yeah,
I mean, all the tax money that would have been generated from the Rockefeller, the building that the Ford Foundation owns, that's all that whole building, multi-story building, is tax exempt because it's a foundation. But what that foundation does is they pay, in lieu of taxes, something like $20 million a year. Mm-hmm. And that's foundation money that the city can use for a lot of things that they might have a hard time getting a city alderman to say, well, that's something I'm going to spend tax dollars on. They may not get much support. But on the other hand, city officials know there's lots of things that need to be done in cities that are hard to explain to people as really being essential or really being good for the life of the community. The example that was given to me when we talked to the people in New York, this was with another fund called the Mayor's Fund. Somebody gave the city of New York $50 million to build soccer fields in neighborhood lots all around the boroughs. Mm-hmm. Well, he doesn't know where best to locate them. He doesn't know where to find the coaches to run it or operate it, but he has the money. Well, there's the Parks and Rec department in the city, and they know probably where the sites are that would be good. So the city accepted that. Really, it was a restricted gift. It was for that purpose, to build those parks, those soccer fields. Can you imagine trying to get voters to say, we want saying it's okay to spend my tax dollars on a soccer field.
Yeah.
Not going to happen. But is it good for the city? Yeah, it's good for kids to get to know each other who may not be ethnically exactly like the next person, because you know how New York is. It's an ethnic melting pot. It's something that actually lots of Americans are very proud of. You know?
Oh, yeah.
So that's all good. Well, let's say we come back to Kalamazoo. Now we have a third of our money coming from this thing. Since it's so much larger percentage of the total, we're going to be scrutinized very closely to see, does this work or does it not work? As somebody told us from New York, and it was official in the mayor's fund, said, you have to realize that you're at the crossroads between money and politics. Just accept that. Right at the beginning, that's where you are. So it was very helpful for him to be so frank with me and the other people who were on the conference call, because he laid it right out there. So it's kind of like, okay, we know that dynamite is dangerous. Do we just lock it up? Dynamite is very handy. So you have to be careful around it, you know? So this is kind of what we're saying. We're dealing with something dangerous here, so be careful. And I just thought of that analogy myself right now.
Oh,
so.
no, I mean, that's good to be cognizant of, because, you know, like the one, like I said, I've given you praise on the show for being forward thinking about these issues, and you know, I think there's something dangerous about not acknowledging the potential problems of it. But I think, you know, again, like I would like to see it work. You know, I've criticized and questioned it more than most people, but at the end of the day, if this is a thing that we're going to have, I want it to you know, work for the people of the city. So
well, we have 3 years to get it to work. Three years of building trust, 3 years of assembling the donations, and then at the end of that period, we're going to have to see if enough of an endowment has been raised to actually keep the taxes at that level, or close to that level. So
well, I really liked what you said. This was a few commission meetings ago, but I think it was like the goal should be about like building a tax base so that we don't necessarily have to rely on this foundation for the city's budget.
Well, see, that gets me to build on that point. That's the long-term ultimate solution that every city up until now has depended upon, is a tax base. Kalamazoo doesn't have a sufficient tax base given its landlocked status, its fact that it has so much property off the tax rolls, and its median income level and housing quality is such that we need help. So to really put ourselves on a sound long-term footing, we should try to wean ourselves from foundation money, which means building the tax base. So what do we need to do to actually do that? To get that, I'll ask that rhetorically and then try to answer it. Well, we have to build up instead of out, because we can't expand our borders. The charter townships laws make it very hard for the city to do any more annexation. So we have to do with what we have. We appreciate the hospitals. We appreciate Western. They're going to stay here. So we have to use better the land that we've got. We're going to have to increase the value of it by having more intense economic activity in the properties that are taxable. So that means a more vibrant and lively downtown. It means probably a lot more multi-story, say 2 to 3 or 4 story apartment buildings, kind of somewhat like the one that's on the corner here near the roundabout, in neighborhoods that it's zoned for already, so that developers can make money on the land that they've got. You only can put so many houses on, single-family houses on a piece of land, but a given piece. But if you have multiple stories and you have some green space around it and good buffering, a good landscaping around, you can really make that quite pleasant. And we've seen some examples of it. Prairie Gardens is one of them, frankly. That's not multi-story. But it's possible to do mixed-use housing that I think neighborhoods
rooftop
who are living there now would be content with. So that's probably enough of that.
All right. Don't feel. I always ask elected officials tough questions at some point. So I know this is something I brought up on the show before, and I know this is not something you and I see eye to eye on. But I did want to kind of give you a chance to explain your point of view. So we're talking about the Pioneer statue in the park, and it's this and a lot of people, some of y'all may or may not notice it. It's that fountain. There's the Pioneer above the Native with the club, and it's something that's really gotten back into the spotlight after what's happened with Charlottesville, and kind of the spots taking those statues down. I'm of the personal opinion. I respect the historical significance of it. I think we should make moves to, put it in a museum. And there's also going to be a restoration project where there's going to be these kind of audio-visual plaques to explain the native history of Bronson Park. Now, I know this is kind of a point of contention with us. What would you like to see, if not removal, what should be done in the vicinity of the statue to deal with the fact that, there is a population that feels, kind of directly offended by it? And how do you think that can be kind of solved without removing the statue? I think that's still your stance. Is that correct?
Well, your words, close to right, yeah. I definitely want to see the fountain remain there. I think taking it somewhere else would take it out of context. It would void has a high likelihood of voiding the historic district designation, its place in the National Historic Registry. And many dollars of donations to restore the park would have to be returned. Setting that aside, that just seems like that's just money. That's, but there's a lot of more to it than that. My main point is that's public art, and public art, at its best, does generate conversations. To put it in a museum where only a select few can see it, will even know that it's there, diminishes its educational value, even though it's in a museum. I mean, how many... well, first of all, it would be very difficult to move. And its value as a historic object goes way down if it's taken, the statue is taken away from the rest of the fountain. It's kind of like a shard of a piece of pottery. Well, I could say, well, it belonged to this great piece of art, but it's no more. So that's hard to swallow. But I see a great value of it right where it is, with all the controversy that has been generated about it, because that controversy has enriched my understanding of the whole situation terrifically in the last 10 years, because I've been involved with this even before I became a city commissioner, because I was chair of the County Public Art Commission when the resolution committee was meeting, or they had just finished meeting, and they had begun to work with the tribes on this educational piece. And everybody that was involved with that thought that was a really slick win-win compromise. And we were set to go with that, but the Public Art Commission, on the recommendation of the Kalamazoo Arts Council, recommended that this whole Bronson Park master plan be completed before anything further was done with the park, to be sure that whatever we do is all the parts know what's happening. It's integrating the whole thing. So that slowed up the fundraising for just fixing the statue, because we want to be sure that when it's fixed, it's really in a beautiful and long-lasting setting. So that's partly why the thing has dragged out so long. Then, of course, the master plan took about quite a number of months to develop. So here we are. It's getting reviewed again, mainly, as you pointed out, because of what happened in Charlottesville. A lot of people in our country had been thinking that once we had a person of color as president, that we were approaching the millennium. And it was quite a wake-up to discover that resentment was building mightily in some other parts of the country. And the resentment plus the gerrymandering plus
voter suppression usually.
Yeah, and Fox News and Fox Opinion, and then our president's election has really set a lot of folks back and said, what are we? Are we in Germany in 1923? Or what? How much is that like it? Well, a lot of folks have woken up and said, we're not going to sit still for this. Well, how best to use that alarm and that new awareness that we have productively? And I'm trying to caution people to not do something foolish here about that fountain that we'll regret later. Because the Taliban, with great sincerity, blew up those statues of the Buddha in Afghanistan. They believed that they were right, but now they're gone and they'll never come back. So that's kind of an extreme example.
I mean, I was going to say, even in your own argument, like, you recognize that it's like a shocking piece of art, and like that's why you say it has to be there. But
well, it's not just there because it's shocking. It's also there because it represents a point of view of a highly regarded artist at the middle of the century. In the context of that time, that artist was really pretty advanced in his thinking. Not by today's standards, but there's a continuum between what was done with people shooting buffalo out of trains deliberately to starve the Indians, the Plains Indians back in the 1880s. So from that perspective, giving honor to the resistance that the native people put up symbolically in that statue, it was some progress at that point. So we have a continuum here. And so now we're at this point. One thing I could see being done to further that progression toward reconciliation with our past mistakes and as a country, as we've become older and wiser, lots of children do foolish things, and they're sorry for it later. While our country was young, it did a lot of foolish things that it's sorry for it later, but they happened, right? I would welcome a change in the name of that statue to the Ianelli Fountain. I see no reason to have it be officially called the Fountain of the Pioneers anymore. But the artist referred to it as that, with that name, and so that's part of the historical record. I say that's what Ianelli named it, just like artist can name any work of art that he did. That's his right of free speech. Mm-hmm. But we don't have to be bound by his name. I think the main feature of the way to start a discussion about that fountain is to give it a neutral name, so that people can go to that and see for themselves how they interact with it. Ian Ellie is the artist. Fountain, yes, it is. Okay, now what do we see there? Well, depending on one's background and one's experience and one's knowledge of art, a whole variety of viewpoints will arise. Almost as many as there are people who view it. The diversity of those people and the diversity of the viewpoints that are expressed in responding to that enrich our culture. And that's what I want to see happen. As long as it's in a public space, it has the highest chance of that happening. Once it's taken away or dismantled, the full potential of it having actually being an destructive cultural benefit to the community will be decreased somewhat, depending on what's done. It could a lot or maybe just a little. But it doesn't have to be changed very much to cause the historic registry to go away. Mm-hmm. If you look at what's written on the website about it, you can see that that fountain is part of a design of the sidewalks and the reflecting pools. It's all of a piece. Ian Ellie designed the whole park, really. Mm-hmm. So disrupting that is kind of like what Western tried to do with East Hall. They disrupted it pretty heavily, and when they tried to get historic designation from the state said no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember that.
So there's limits to what you can do and still retain that. And Western created a nice space for their new purposes, but to still call it historic,
Yeah, I would agree. And it's about 6:50. Show's going to be wrapping up in just a couple minutes. Just before we wrap up, I wanted to give you a chance. So, just maybe explain to the listeners at home, why you decided to be a city commissioner and what some of your priorities are going to be for your next term.
Okay. Well, I used to be a county commissioner, and at the last census, the districts got moved around, so that I had to run against another incumbent, and the other incumbent was Dave Buskirk, and he really wanted the job very much to have it as a platform to run for state rep. Well, I didn't want to make it hard for him to do that, and anyway, I was getting ready to say, well, I'd really rather work in the city. It's my interests and my expertise are more useful there, because 65% of the county's business is law enforcement, the courts, and the sheriff and the jail. I don't have much to offer in those fields. But in terms of urban planning and architecture and making a city feel wholesome and welcoming, that's what the city has done for me, and I just want to pass that on. So I thought of myself as being kind of like the heir to commissioner who's retiring, so it would be an open seat in a year, and so I decided to run for the city, and so my enjoyment as a problem solver is fulfilled pretty well here in the city. I'm getting to meet many people who are far different from the crowd I used to hang out with at Upjohn. And that's very enriching. It's really very mind-opening. It really helps keep me alive at my age to meet people I was unaware of when I was behind the fence doing work with chemicals. So I think at one point, well, I've been interested in urban planning. I took a course at Lehigh, and the part I liked on American art and architecture, and I did a term paper on the urban planning connected with Charleston, South Carolina, and I just really enjoyed that. I said, okay, so that piqued my interest. Then I got to be on the zoning board of appeals in the city when Upjohn would let you leave work to do volunteer work for government locally. I got to get my hands dirty doing that. That's a bad analogy. Got my feet wet.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very fulfilling thing for me to do now. It fits just right for me, and I enjoy feeling that I'm being useful. I very much want to be accessible. I think people find me accessible. When people are talking to me, I give them my full attention.
Great. And just the second part of that question, what would be your priorities, your top priorities if you get reelected?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all is to establish an open, trusting relationship with the foundation and the city and the foundation, and then foundation together with the city with the people who live in it. So it's kind of like after the Constitution was ratified, what really set the tone for our country was the first president, and all the precedents were set during that first 2 years, 2 to 4 years, 2 to 6 years when you count the Senate. How successful this is going to be depends on what happens just in the next few years. Now, I want to be involved with that. So that's number one. The other thing is my priority for me is implementing the new master plan for the city. It's really a pretty revolutionary plan. It's much more people-oriented, but has much more public input on it, and a chance for continued public input as each neighborhood develops its own plan, gets it approved by the Planning Commission, then by the City Commission, and then added to as an amendment to the master plan. Besides that, there's going to have to be a lot of changes in zoning regulations, building regulations, to actually implement what's intended by the master plan. I want to have a hand in that, too.
Okay, well, Jack, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show and answering questions. Again, everybody, election is November 7th. That is next Tuesday. So, if have any follow-up questions, Jack, how can you be contacted for the voting population of Kalamazoo here?
Well, I'd say 3 ways. One is my phone number. My cell phone is 910-6761, local area code. My email address is jackerb@me.com. So it's not Jack Urban, it's just Jack Herb. Okay, so that's ready accessible. My link to my Facebook page is urbanforkazoo.com. That's a little less interactive, but there you have it. You can drop pieces of literature off at this city manager's office, and it'll get into my mail file there. It's another way.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much for coming on, Jack. And that's going to be about it for our show tonight as well. Couple things coming up this weekend for all you social justice warriors out there. The group Kalamazoo for Revolution is going to be having a meeting at the Kalamazoo Public Library in the Van Dusen Room tomorrow at 6 p.m. Also going down actually at 7 o'clock, the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, in about 2 minutes are going to be having a meeting at 814 Southwest Nidge. If you're interested in getting involved with them, internet's being kind of slow here. Let's see if we can. Oh yeah, there we go. There's going to be a speaker actually on tomorrow night speaking about climate change, and I believe that's at Brown Hall at 7. And let me make sure. On Saturday at 2 o'clock, There's going to be a Michigan Marijuana License Leader Rally event. It's at 2 p.m. And at 4, or actually I think it's going to be at 5 p.m. on Sunday. Michigan People's Campaign is going to be having a movement politics training that's open to everyone. If you're interested in what their whole strategic breakdown is, it's very interesting if you're looking to run a progressive campaign now or in the future. They do kind of like an educational tutorial. So anyway, that's going to be the show. I want to thank you all for listening, and keep fighting for that revolution solution. I'm out.